declines to delay the upcoming trial for Steve Bannon, who faces contempt charges for refusing to cooperate with the House Select Committee investigating January 6th. The former Trump advisor is scheduled to go on trial next week, despite telling the panel over the weekend he is now prepared to testify. Plus, President Biden celebrates the recently signed bipartisan gun violence prevention bill at the White House, but stresses it does not go far enough, why critics are demanding much more needs to be done. And firefighters start to contain a massive wildfire in California's Yosemite National Park that more than doubled in size over the weekend. The blaze has threatened some of the oldest sequoia trees in the world. Plus, a new report highlights the religious rights efforts to lobby some conservative justices on the Supreme Court, how they're using elaborate dinners and social activities to try to influence certain cases. And later this hour, Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney has become a popular figure among Democrats for her role on the January 6th committee, but she's starting to lose support among her own party. Why some think she has a lot of work to do to win over voters in her home state. But we begin tonight with the January 6th committee investigation. A key ally of former President Trump is now saying he's willing to testify to the committee. Former White House chief strategist Steve Bannon says he would testify in public after not complying with a subpoena from the committee. A trial stemming from his refusal to comply with the subpoena is set to start in the coming days. And at the White House today, President Biden touted the recent passage of the bipartisan gun control bill. He said the legislation, after nearly 3 decades of inaction on Capitol Hill, will pave the way for lawmakers to pass more regulations on firearms. For more on this and the day's top political stories, let's bring in Christina Ruffini and Siobhan Hughes. Christina is a CBS News correspondent, and Siobhan is a Capitol Hill reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Christina, I want to start with you. President Biden today touted the passage of the bipartisan gun control legislation today, but there have been a number of mass shootings since he signed that bill into law last month. What other measures is the president calling on Congress to pass?
Well, Nicole, you were there for the ceremony. As you know, he was interrupted at one point by a protester who's a father of a child who was killed in one of these incidents, and he was urging the president to do more. And the president said, you're right, we do need to do more. He said he does support a ban on assault weapons. He supports a limit on high-capacity magazines, and he thinks that people should be held responsible if they have weapons, if they have guns that they don't secure, and those weapons are then used to kill people. He thinks they should be culpable for that act. But the mood today was celebratory, which some people disagreed with and some people didn't. But in this gridlocked Congress that we've got in this sharply divided Senate, it was an accomplishment to be able to get anything done. The question is it enough, and will it really have an impact on these mass shootings and the violence that we're seeing across the country?
Christina, the president said he's considering declaring a public health emergency to increase abortion access. Is the White House expected to actually make this declaration, and which recourses would be available if they did?
It sounds like they're backing away from that a little bit. The president this weekend was asked about it while he was on a bike ride in Rehoboth, and he said it's something we're looking at. At the briefing today, the spokeswoman said, you know, it's on the table. All options are on the table. But when they really started to dig into what that power is, it doesn't seem like it's going to be able to enable them to do a lot. And that's the problem with this issue in general. You look, the power of the executive is very limited on issues like this. And any of these measures they take that do have an impact, you have to imagine states that want to ban abortion will then counter with laws that will then probably get appealed or sued against, and it'll go right back up to the Supreme Court. So again and again, the White House has said the best recourse for this is to vote in pro-abortion rights advocates into Congress and to codify Roe v. Wade in federal law, federal abortion rights protections that come through the U.S. Congress, because as we all learned from Schoolhouse Rock, that's where the laws get made.
Good point there. Well, Siobhan, the House is planning to vote this week on 2 measures that would expand abortion access. Walk us through what are in these measures and if they have a chance to pass in the Senate.
So there are 2 different bills. One is called the Women's Health Protection Act. This is a reprise of a bill that already came up on the House floor and passed, but stalled out in the Senate. What this would do is say that on a national basis, women are entitled to an abortion up until the point of viability, and after, if necessary. With viability, the determination of the doctor, the medical profession, not the state. And that is something that Republicans are not going to accept. In fact, they have not accepted it, but Democrats need to show they are doing something for their base. The second bill is more narrowly targeted, and the central thrust of it would be to prevent states from taking punitive action that could stop a woman from going to another state to get an abortion. This is the issue of crossing state lines. It's something that Nancy Pelosi had said was on the table. It's something that Joe Biden had been encouraging. And so it's unclear whether this would actually get a vote in the Senate, but this is much more narrowly tailored.
And Siobhan, I want to ask you a couple questions now about the January 6th committee. Former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon says that he is willing to testify now. What do we know about if the committee will actually bring him in for testimony?
Well, over the weekend, Jamie Raskin, one of the committee members, didn't shut the door on it. He said the committee certainly likes to hear from everybody, but there could be some caveats in here. For example, in the letter that Mr. Bannon's lawyer sent over to the committee, he said that Mr. Bannon would prefer to testify in public. This is something that the committee has not allowed people to do. It's something that could give a Trump ally a platform to espouse his or her views. And also it's something that makes it much harder for investigators who are able to have a lot more credibility with witnesses if they keep the information close to their chests. So the conditions are unclear. Whether or not this is a stunt is unclear. It is clear that Mr. Bannon, should he choose to be forthright, could be very, very revealing. He was, for example, at the Willard Hotel on January 5th, right before January 6th, when there was the effort to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election, essentially by either stopping the account or forcing it to go back to the states. Let's add on to this, too. We also don't know if Mr. Bannon, upon going in to testify, would decide to take the fifth.
Yeah, and obviously another key figure was former White House counsel Pat Cipollone. He testified to the committee behind closed doors for 8 hours on Friday. Committee member Jamie Raskin said on Face the Nation yesterday that testimony was valuable.
We are going to get to use a lot of Mr. Cipollone's testimony to corroborate other things we've learned along the way. He was the White House counsel at the time. He was aware of every major move, I think, that Donald Trump was making to try to overthrow the 2020 election and essentially seize the presidency. And so I considered his testimony valuable.
Could we see portions of Cipollone's testimony at tomorrow's hearing or any other hearings going forward? What are you hearing?
It seems highly likely at tomorrow's hearing, and that's because of the substance that will be the focus. We're going to learn the backstory behind the December 19th tweet that President Trump made, "Be there, will be wild," because on December 18th, a group of people, including the lawyer Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, President Trump's first national security advisor, essentially broke into the White House and finagled a meeting with Mr. Trump in which they discussed how the election count could be stopped in the pathway to overturning the election. And according to an account provided by a person who was there named Patrick Byrne, Mr. Cipollone at one point participated in that meeting, essentially trying to stop a lot of these ideas from progressing. But Mr. Cipollone would be a firsthand witness to that conversation, and which sort of sets the stage for the substance of what they want to talk about, the luring, the siren call to people to come to the Capitol, and that effort to really rev up the Trump base.
And then, Christina, President Biden, as you know, is set to visit the Middle East, including Saudi Arabia this week. What's on the agenda for this trip?
Right. Well, first he's going to go to Israel, where he hasn't been yet as president, but has been before as vice president and in previous roles. He's going to reassure America's ally that, our solidarity with that country transcends parties and administrations. As you might remember, the last administration was particularly close to the then Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's no longer in power. They're having a bit of a shuffle there once again. So the president is going to go and, do what every president does, which is visit Israel and reassure them that, America has their back. Then the president is going to Saudi Arabia, and this is particularly we're going to go ahead and say the word controversial because on the campaign trail, President Biden said it should be treated as a pariah nation after the killing and dismembering of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi in a Saudi consulate in Turkey. You know, he said all these things, but when the rubber meets the road, this war between Russia and Ukraine has caused a massive oil and gas spike in prices across the world, as we know, and the Biden administration needs to show that it's doing everything it can to potentially bring those prices down, even going to countries like Saudi Arabia. Now, today, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan held a briefing where he used the word human rights multiple times and tried to emphasize that, look, the U.S. can do both. It can stand up for human rights and it can make these strategic partnerships. The president had the byline on an op-ed in the Washington Post this week where he said, in order for America to push back against Russia and compete with China, we need strategic allies like Saudi Arabia. He understood that not everybody supported his trip, but it was important for America's national security interests that they go and that we have a relationship with the kingdom. Now, other colleagues of mine asked today if the president will be on camera shaking hands with Mohammed bin Salman, who you might remember, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who U.S. intelligence reports say was responsible for that killing. And Sullivan didn't quite answer and said he didn't know the ins and outs and wasn't sure exactly what would happen. So we'll have to see if we get a handshake on camera between those two men. But as we said this weekend, it just goes to show that no matter what the aspirations of each of these administrations is, they always come in saying we're going to do better, we're going to uphold human rights. But in a crisis, it's those strategic interests that really bear the brunt and that end up getting priority. And that's something we're seeing with the president's trip to Saudi.
Well, Christina Ruffini and Siobhan Hughes, it's going to be a busy week. Thanks very much. And a programming note, CBS News will have all-day coverage of tomorrow's January 6th House Select Committee hearing. It's expected to start at 1 p.m. Eastern. We will have a team of correspondents, including yours truly, and analysts to break it all down. That is right here on CBS News. Vice President Harris says Congress needs to act on abortion following the Supreme Court ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade. Why she thinks Democrats took abortion rights for granted and what she has to say about the Biden administration's strategy on the issue. Plus, President Biden marks the passage of the first significant federal gun safety legislation in 30 years. Why he says the bipartisan package is an important start, but more still needs to be done to curb gun violence. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Norah O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Norah O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
people from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Vice President Kamala Harris addressed a number of pressing issues, including the upcoming midterm elections and abortion rights during a sit-down with CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa for Face the Nation.
Finish this sentence for me. Americans need to vote for Democrats in November because
our democracy is on the ballot. Truly. Truly. If you look at an issue like choice, it's on the ballot. A woman's right to make decisions about her own body and potentially what can happen in the not too distant future around issues like access to and making decisions about contraception or same-sex marriage. Elections matter.
did Democrats fail, past Democratic presidents, congressional leaders, to not codify Roe v. Wade over the past 5 decades?
I do believe that we should have rightly believed, but we certainly believe that certain issues are just settled. Certain issues are just settled.
Clearly we're not.
No, that's right. And that's why I do believe that we are living, sadly, in real unsettled times. There's another example of this point, voting rights. The fundamental principle of our democracy is everyone should have access, who are entitled to have access to vote. And now you see states across the country that are intentionally making it more difficult for people to vote.
And Robert Costa is with me now. Bob, this was quite a wide-ranging interview. Got a lot of time with the vice president. What is the administration's strategy on abortion rights now ahead of the midterms?
They are facing immense pressure. Vice President Harris, along with President Biden, are confronting a Democratic Party and some Republicans who support abortion rights who remain outraged about the Supreme Court's decision. And in the wake of that ruling, the administration has taken steps, including an executive order last week, to try to expand and bolster access to abortion. But the outcry continues, and they're exploring further federal steps. But the real action would have to come on Capitol Hill, an effort to codify abortion rights, to put into law the kind of access that the administration would like to see across this nation. And it's a real challenge for Democrats because the majorities they have in Congress are so narrow.
What about on the economy?
The economy is front and center for so many voters. As I've traveled around the country over the past few months, it's evident that kitchen table issues, inflation, this is what's on the mind of American voters in both parties, and the voters that this administration and Democrats really need to hold on to the majorities in Congress are looking at gas prices and wondering, how are we going to pay this? Now, the administration has pointed to gas prices falling in recent weeks, but they know inflation's still an issue, and that's why I asked the vice president, despite some progress on certain fronts on the economy, 75% of Americans still feel the economy's in a bad place. That's according to CBS News polling. And she said she hears that, but the administration's trying to do things like go at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to try to encourage gas companies, oil companies to lower prices.
And how did Vice President Harris handle questions about possibly running in 2024?
There is speculation in the Democratic Party about whether President Biden will run again and seek the Democratic nomination. There was a front page story in the New York Times on Sunday by Peter Baker about President Biden's age and how it's unusual to have an incumbent president in that stage of his life in terms of his age. David Gergen, an advisor to four former presidents, told Peter Baker, and he told CBS News, Gergen did a few months ago, that someone who's near 80 should perhaps reconsider running for president. But all signs point to President Biden and Vice President Harris running again. Vice President Harris said to CBS News, Face the Nation, that President Biden intends to run again and seek the nomination in 2024. And if he does, she will run with him on that ticket.
And what is her role moving forward?
She is someone who has been meeting with abortion rights activists around the time of our interview last Friday, Nicole. She sat down with abortion rights activists from different states. So this is someone who comes out of California, has law enforcement experience, is a lawyer, understands the law, not only as a prosecutor, but as someone who talks to base activists across the Democratic Party, particularly on the abortion issue. My sources around the vice president and in the top ranks of the Democratic Party expect her to be on the campaign trail a lot in the coming months, to rally for different candidates and hit the points of democracy, voting rights, abortion rights. That really seems to be her bailiwick these days, politically speaking.
Robert Costa, thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole.
President Biden will meet with Mexico's president in Washington tomorrow. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador's visit comes a month after he refused to attend President Biden's Summit of the Americas. Mexico's leader has demanded Mr. Biden invite Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela to the summit. López Obrador says he plans on discussing inflation and immigration in Tuesday's meeting. The Biden administration is marking the passage of a bill aimed at reducing gun violence in the U.S. The legislation was signed into law last month in response to the deadly attacks in Buffalo and Uvalde, although more mass shootings have continued since then. Skylar Henry reports from the White House.
Geraldine Talley, Pearl Young, and Mrs. Ruth E. Whitfield, our 86-year-old mother.
Victims of gun violence joined President Biden at the White House, hailing the passage of the nation's first major gun legislation in nearly 30 years.
As we have seen, no community is immune to the fallout. Rather, the fallout is landing in our backyard on a weekly basis.
Congress passed the bill last month in the wake of recent mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde.
This new law requires young people under 21 to go enhanced background checks before purchasing a gun.
The father of a 17-year-old killed in the high school shooting in Parkland, Florida in 2018, shouted at President Biden to do more. President Biden is calling for the return of the assault weapons ban of 1994 that he helped pass when he was a senator.
In that 10 years it was law, mass shootings went down. When the law expired in 2004 and those weapons were allowed to be sold again, mass shootings tripled.
Just last week, another mass shooter used a high-powered military-style assault weapon to kill 7 people at a July 4th parade in the Chicago suburb of Highland Park.
We believe strongly in the state of Illinois in protecting our citizens from these kinds of weapons, but if the states around us don't, then what are we to do?
The White House says it's also celebrating the 21 executive actions President Biden has signed to address gun violence, including a ruling on ghost guns, requiring homemade guns contain serial numbers so they can be traced. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the White House.
A new poll shows a majority of Democratic voters do not want to see President Biden run again in 2024. We go inside the White House's response to these numbers and what they mean in terms of support within his own party. Plus, we take you to Wyoming ahead of next month's primary, how Congresswoman Liz Cheney is polling against Trump-backed challenger Harriet Hageman, and take a look at whether her role on the House Select Committee investigating January 6th is having an impact on the numbers. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the
And
past?
to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. Here's a look at some of our top stories. Former White House advisor Steve Bannon has agreed to speak with the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Despite his last-minute decision to testify, a judge has denied Bannon's request to delay his contempt of Congress trial, scheduled to begin next week. Plus, American basketball player Brittany Griner is due back in Russian court Thursday after recently pleading guilty to drug possession. The WNBA honored Griner in its All-Star Game Sunday. The league continues to push for the release of the 7-time All-Star who has been wrongfully detained since February. And the fast-growing Washburn fire in Yosemite National Park doubled in size over the weekend. Campers and residents have been ordered to evacuate the area while firefighters race to save the park's iconic sequoia trees. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has tested positive for COVID-19. A spokesperson for the senator says he is, quote, fully vaccinated and double boosted and has very mild symptoms. This comes as the Senate returns from a 2-week recess. Schumer will isolate and work remotely from his Brooklyn home this week. The January 6th committee reportedly scheduled that surprise hearing with former White House aide Cassidy Hutchinson over concerns of witness tampering. The New York Times is reporting Hutchinson received a phone message saying, quote, he knows you're loyal, a day before speaking to the committee in June. The committee members decided to schedule the public hearing partly because of that message. Sources also told the Times that the committee scheduled the hearing quickly to avoid leaks of her testimony. Wyoming Congresswoman Liz Cheney is facing a challenge from her own Republican Party members ahead of August GOP primary election. A poll conducted by Quinnipiac University last month shows a mere 17% of Republicans across the U.S. approve of Representative Cheney's job as the vice chair on the January 6th House Select Committee. 61% disapprove. According to the Wyoming Secretary of State, 71% of registered voters in Wyoming are Republican. Joining us now is Victoria Evis. She is a state politics reporter in Wyoming for the Casper Star-Tribune. Victoria, this recent poll from Quinnipiac University indicates waning support for Congresswoman Cheney from her own party. However, this is a national rather than a statewide poll. So based on your own reporting, how do Wyoming residents currently feel about Congresswoman Cheney?
It's hard to say. It's a mixed bag for sure. I think a lot of people definitely do disapprove of the job that she's done, especially after her service in the January 6th committee and especially after she took on such a prominent role in a couple of the hearings. Something a professor pointed out to me the other day that I think is important to remember is a lot of people can say how much they dislike her or say how much they like her and how much they admire her actions on the committee. But how many of those people actually show up to vote is still very up in the air. And I think that that's, the time-old issue with polling like that.
But she has a lot of political capital. Obviously, her father does as well. I mean, does that count for something?
I think it has in the past, for sure, when she didn't face she hasn't faced a tough challenger yet in the primary. So in the past, yeah, voters vote for the name they know. Now that Trump is backing her challenger, that's another big name. So how far that's going to get her this time around is probably waning.
Yeah, well, speaking of other big names, independent and Democratic donors like film producer Jeffrey Katzenberg are coming out in support of Congresswoman Cheney because of her role on the January 6th committee. How might this make a difference in whether or not she'll be reelected?
Yeah. She's swimming in cash. And it shows. She's already put out 3 ads in the last month. She's really ramping things up. But I mean, Hageman has more in-state funds, it seems, from more donors. So I think that, those two have to be weighed against each other. But at the end of the day, we always see people who don't raise as much win races. So I think the funding is a tough thing to look at in this race just because of Cheney's national stature.
And in terms of the ongoing January 6 hearings, do you think that could impact Republican voters in the state, or have most already formed a position on them and are unlikely to change their minds at this point?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that it is one of those races, from what I can tell, is that most people aren't undecided anymore. It's just a matter of whether they go out to vote. But one of the things that people who are anti-Cheney these days are saying is it's the impeachment vote angered them, but the January 6th committee service is really what's driving their dislike for Representative Cheney.
And I just want to get back to one point that you just made in terms of the fundraising and financing for both of these candidates, because according to Open Secrets, Congresswoman Cheney has raised significantly more money, as you referenced, than her rival and Trump-endorsed candidate Harriet Hageman ahead of the August primary elections. Hageman, however, as pointed out, has raised more than twice as much as Congresswoman Cheney from in-state donors. So how significant are these figures?
Definitely notable and definitely something the Cheney campaign should be worried about, even though they're swimming in cash. And I'm sure that's going to be even more the case after this month of hearings. The filings were due just the other day, and so I'm sure that that margin between in-state and out-of-state between those two candidates is going to widen even more.
Well, Victoria Evis, I know you've got a busy couple of weeks ahead of you, and the nation certainly will be watching this race closely now, just about a month away. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The Supreme Court's conservative shift continues to make waves in the political sphere. What a new article says about how one religious group is holding particular sway with various members of the High Court. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the
And
past?
to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
We found it.
You're kidding me!
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
A new poll from the New York Times and Siena College is showing a shift away from President Biden among Democratic voters. The poll shows 64% of Democratic voters do not want Mr. Biden to be renominated in 2024, with just 26% wanting to see him as the party's candidate again. Among voters, younger voters, 18 to 29 years old, 94% of Democratic voters want a different candidate in the next presidential election. For more, let's bring in national correspondent for The Washington Post, Philip Bump. And Philip, break down these numbers for us because it was a little startling here. I mean, is this just a generational divide, or is the Democratic Party just moving in a different direction?
That's a great question. And I think the answer is that both of those things sort of overlap. So we've seen since 2016 a generational divide in the Democratic Party, where you had younger Democrats who preferred candidates like Bernie Sanders in 2016 and in 2020, older Democrats who tend to be more moderate, preferring candidates like Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. So Joe Biden gets elected. He beats Donald Trump in 2020, obviously. And at first, he has strong approval ratings. But over time, that slid both overall and particularly among younger Democrats who have come to see him as someone who is not getting done what they had hoped he'd get done. Now, at the same time, and this is really important, and this is actually a point that the White House raised today, Donald Trump still loses to Joe Biden in a theoretical rematch in this same poll. So Democrats would like to have a different candidate, but if it comes down between Biden and Trump, Democrats are still very much on board with reelecting Joe Biden.
President Biden has said repeatedly that he will run again in 2024, but could these numbers change the calculus?
Well, I think we're already starting to see some of the calculus shifting. We're seeing, well, there isn't anyone who's overtly saying, hey, I'm going to run against you in 2024, which we may see, frankly, after the midterms. We are seeing people like Governor Gavin Newsom of California, who's trying to make a very prominent name for himself. He's running ads. He's taking on Ron DeSantis in Florida. He's doing all these various steps that you would expect of someone who has designs on higher office. If you're doing that now in 2022 before the midterms, that suggests that you might be thinking about running in 2024 as well. He's not the only one. We're seeing similar rumblings and hearing different things from other Democrats. So it seems not unlikely that Biden might actually face a primary challenge.
20% of people polled said the economy was the most important issue facing the U.S. 15% said inflation. How has President Biden's response to these issues impacted his support among his base?
Well, this is one of those classic situations where the downside is almost exclusively what people are going to focus on. The downside is going to be much, much bigger than the upside. People are going to dump a lot of blame on the White House and on Biden for these inflation numbers. And should inflation start to go down dramatically, it's unlikely that Biden will receive a lot of the benefit. We see the same thing at play, for example, with gas prices. As they're going up, Biden got a lot of blame. Now that they're going down, not a lot of people are stepping forward to say that Biden should deserve the credit for that. This is part of being president. You are the guy who's running the country. You get assigned blame for things. The classic, the buck stops with you. So I imagine it's very frustrating for folks at the White House, but there's not a lot they can do. In the same way, there's not a whole lot they can do about inflation. There's not a whole lot they can do about how Americans react to it.
Voters in the poll also gave the president a 33% job approval rating. How is the White House reacting to these numbers?
Well, one can certainly imagine the White House isn't terribly thrilled. We've seen back when Biden's numbers started to fall last year, they tried to come out and say, oh, look, this particular poll was an outlier. You shouldn't pay much attention to it. Now it's just been this battery of bad poll numbers he's been enduring for really about 12 months now. This one is probably a little lower than other polls just due to methodological issues. Someone from the New York Times who's responsible for polling suggested that because of who they chose in the poll, it's probably lower in part because of that. But look, these are bad poll numbers. At the end of the day, I think what the White House is going to focus on and what they tried to focus on again today in their press briefing is he still beats Donald Trump in a one-to-one matchup in this poll, 44% to 41%, really a tie. But, he comes out ahead of him. That, I think, is Joe Biden's salvation. If he runs against Donald Trump again, if he gets the Democratic nomination, that's going to be as good a position as he's going to find himself in, I think, in 2024.
All right. Well, a lot to follow in these next couple of years ahead of us. Philip Bump, thanks so much. We want to take you now to the White House, where moments ago, President Biden and Vice President Harris received a briefing from NASA to preview the first images from the Webb Space Telescope.
Well, it's great to be with you all. And I was going to say good afternoon, but we're starting this meeting late because I was engaged in preparing for a trip to the Middle East. But today is a historic day. And thank you, Vice President Harris, Chair of the National Space Council. And thank you, my dear friend and our outstanding NASA administrator and the only guy here that's been in space, Bill Nelson. Bill, you're a good friend. Thank you very much for what you're doing. And Dr. Nelson, you're doing a great job leading this Office of Science and Technology and Policy. It really is a matter. It really is amazing. 6.5 months ago, a rocket launched from Earth, carrying the world's newest, most powerful deep space telescope on a journey 1 million miles into the cosmos. First of all, that blows my mind. 1 million miles into the cosmos. Along the way, unfolding itself, deploying a mirror 21 feet wide, a sun shield the size of a tennis court, and 250,000 tiny shutters, each one smaller than a grain of sand. Put together, it's a new window into the history of our universe. And today, we're going to get a glimpse of the first light to shine through that window. Light from other worlds, orbiting stars, far beyond our own. It's astounding to me when I read this and I saw the first. I mean, it really is. It's anyway, I don't want to, I'll see what they think when we see this. But light where stars were born and from where they die. Light from the oldest galaxies, the oldest documented light in the history of the universe, from over 13 billion, let me say that again, 13 billion years ago. It's hard to even fathom. Tomorrow, when this image is shared with the world, it'll be a historic moment for science and technology, for astronomy and space exploration, for America and all of humanity. You know, as an international collaboration, this telescope embodies how America leads the world, not by the example of our power, but the power of our example. A partnership with others. It symbolizes the relentless spirit of American ingenuity, and it shows what we can achieve, what more we can discover, not just about distant places, but about our very own planet and climate, like NASA's Earth Systems Observatory that we launched last year. That's why the federal government must invest in science and technology more than we have in the past. These images are going to remind the world that America can do big things, and they remind the American people, especially our children, that there's nothing beyond our capacity, nothing beyond our capacity. We can see possibilities no one has ever seen before. We can go places no one has ever gone before. You know, you've heard me say over and over again, America is defined by one single word: possibilities. Possibilities. I want to thank the team at NASA for once again showing that that's who we are. That's who we are as a nation of possibilities. And now let's take a look at the very first image from this miraculous telescope. NASA Administrator Nelson, I'm going to turn this over to you. So will you please tell us about what we're seeing?
And again, you've been watching NASA give a briefing to President Biden and Vice President Harris at the White House to show the very first images from the agency's Webb Space Telescope. We're going to take a quick break. More news ahead. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel.
Here we are in our virtual view. Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail. We experience the weather in a whole new way.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Wealthy volunteers of a religious organization have reportedly spent years personally pushing their conservative positions on members of the nation's highest court. A new Politico article reports the former leader of the Faith and Action Group arranged for roughly 20 couples to wine and dine justices, including Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and the late Antonin Scalia, for years. The headquarters of the Faith and Action was located near the Supreme Court from 1995 to 2018. According to the article, Justices Thomas and Alito did not respond to a request for comment. The family of the late Justice Scalia could not be reached. Joining us now for more on this is Josh Gerstein. He is a senior legal affairs reporter for Politico and co-authored the article. Josh, thanks so much for being with us. What was the genesis of this article?
Well, we've been doing a lot of reporting on the Supreme Court and the influences on it that go outside the courtroom. I think for many years there's been a tendency to just look at what happens in the four corners of that courtroom and the formal positions that are submitted on paper. But of course, as we know across Washington, that isn't always the way business gets done. And there certainly are many efforts to influence Congress and the executive branch through informal channels, if you will. And we learned about one such effort involving the judiciary that we thought was newsworthy because you don't hear so much about behind-the-scenes efforts to influence the justices.
The judicial branch prides itself on independence. So how were these couples able to gain access to justices to push their views?
Well, it's not entirely clear how all of them got access, Nicole, but at least the one couple that we identified in the article, Don and Gail Wright, who were from Ohio, outside of Dayton, Ohio. They were a wealthy family. They'd made money in a furniture business as well as real estate development and real estate brokering. And they managed some entree through something called the Supreme Court Historical Society, which is a charity close to the Supreme Court, runs a gift shop inside the Supreme Court, and generally, engages in efforts to try to promote history about the Supreme Court. And it is a way Don Wright became a trustee of that group, was elected to at least 2-3-year terms. And that became at least one method through which some of these individuals working with this Faith and Action group were able to get close to the justices by attending annual dinners. And it looks like being hosted in the justices' private offices based on some of the photos that we had accompanying our article.
The organization that you profile that arranged these meetings, Faith in Action, is now a part of a group called Liberty Counsel. Its founder and chairman was also interviewed for this article. What was his response to these claims of wining and dining justices?
So Matt Staver has been involved with this group since 2018 because he now runs a broader group that took it over, as you say, Nicole, called Liberty Counsel. And they are involved in advocacy before the court. And so he says he's been careful to keep a distance between some sort of social interactions with the justices that could be portrayed as any way related to cases and the group's litigation work. And most of the stories we've heard about behind-the-scenes efforts to cozy up to the justices, to invite them to dinners or to stay at private homes in places like Jackson Hole, Wyoming and Siesta Key, Florida, that generally took place in the 2000s or perhaps into the 2010s. And he claims that since he's been involved with the group, there hasn't been any of that sort of behind-the-scenes activity, although he does say that they regularly pray for the justices outside the court.
And why do you think the story is so significant, especially in this post-Roe v. Wade era?
Well, as I said, Nicole, I think it is interesting to see when there are outside groups that are looking to advance their agenda in some unofficial way at the Supreme Court outside the usual channels. And look, we're talking about justices who tended to be socially conservative in their outlook anyway. And I think a cynic might say, well, they were going to vote a conservative line anyway. But the efforts that were made behind the scenes here, Rob Schenck, the former leader of this group, told us were aimed at encouraging those justices to be more open, more forthright, more bold, perhaps even more aggressive in stating their religiously inspired positions and in stating their religious beliefs in public. And then that would get the ball rolling in a direction of more conservative decisions from the Supreme Court. And certainly I wouldn't say this is the only factor or the main factor, but there's no question we now see the court moving in that direction.
And Josh Gerstein, a really interesting read. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nicole.
Iowa's long reign as the first in the nation caucus state for presidential elections could soon come to an end. CBS News' Natalie Brand reports on the Democratic National Committee's upcoming vote on the nation's primary and caucus lineup.
Since 1972, the first test of presidential hopefuls has started with Iowa, a campaign trail that winds through the state fair, rural farmland, and of course, caucus night.
All of our representatives are currently busy.
But after 2020's caucus chaos, the Democratic National Committee is considering shaking up the schedule. And 16 states plus Puerto Rico are vying for the honor, with state officials traveling to D.C. to make their pitches before the DNC's Rules and Bylaws Committee.
We're ready to be first.
Nevada, currently third on the calendar, is one of the states making a big play to move to the head of the line.
I just feel like Nevada has the edge.
Nevada Democratic Party Chair Judith Whitmer argues the state offers battleground competitiveness and diversity, especially among key and growing voting blocs of Latino and Asian American Pacific Islanders, in addition to unions.
We have to make sure that all those voices are represented and all those voices are heard.
Midwestern states, including Minnesota and Michigan, are also battling to replace Iowa.
You don't win the White House unless you win Michigan.
No matter which state lands in that coveted first spot, George Washington University professor Laura Brown says it's really the first few contests that can make or break a presidential campaign, taking on more weight than maybe they should.
They create a momentum. They create a message that the party has decided, and they've decided very quickly, when really the parties would be better served by a calendar that was longer and a process that engaged more people.
But it will be no more than 5 states that hold their contest before the first Tuesday in March, raising the stakes for those deciding the calendar. Natalie Brand, CBS News, Washington.
Ukraine's defense minister says U.S. long-range rocket systems have been a, quote, game changer in the war against Russia. Alexei Reznikov says the weapons provided by the U.S. played a key part in defending the Northeast, but the country still needs more foreign aid. He says Ukrainian troops specifically need more armed vehicles, tanks, and drones. Since the war began, the U.S. has committed $6.9 billion worth of security assistance to Ukraine. That includes an $820 million weapons package approved earlier this month. That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming the internet.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Social media, apps, and games.
I like my iPad, my phone, my Nintendo.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's one click away.
Is growing up digital a blessing or a curse?
There is so much pressure to be perfect.
We need to have conversations regarding healthier usage.
Are the kids all right? The internet, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
Let's get the forecast from our partners at the Weather Channel. Here we are in our virtual view.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battering rams.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
This is our virtual view, what it actually looks like.
Those are some of the best graphics I've seen.
Spare no expense, Gail.
We experience the weather in a whole new way.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before. That's correct. Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers? They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it. You're kidding me! We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app. Nearly half of America's murderers are walking free. Why? CBS News is finding out using the power of our local and national investigative journalists across the country. Crime without punishment. See it all on cbsnews.com/unsolved.